I don't think most people really appreciate how the economy and the larger global financial system really works. I have to say, I don't know either very much. It's a very complex system. And I have to say that we all, to a greater or lesser extent, depend on it for our livelihood. And we take it for granted. But what happens if that system stops working? Well, it won't. They'll always fix it. They'll keep it going. There might be a recession or a depression. That's true. There's cycles that occur. There are booms and busts, and there have been many busts. But never before has the system been so intertwined and dependent upon so many varying factors that it is possible for the whole system to simply cease to function, for money to become worthless. And I'm convinced that that is what is going to happen. And it will not be by accident, but rather by design. You know, they call it the fiat money system. And it's paper or digits that aren't really backed by anything. It's a rather new invention. But a little insight into how it got started. People since the beginning have used gold and silver as money. And of course, people barter for things. You know, I'll give you 2 chickens for that nice garment, whatever. But around the 14th, 15th century, people began accumulating gold, and there were goldsmiths who kept your gold for safekeeping. And they would write you a receipt for your gold on deposit. And as time went on, people began circulating these gold receipts as if they were money. And if you sold your receipt to someone for goods or services, then he could take your receipt to the gold banker and get the gold that you had originally deposited. Wow. The gold keepers got thinking, well, we're accumulating a lot of gold here. Why don't we offer our own receipts and redeemable for the gold we have on deposit here? And so that was really the beginning of paper money, because it was a lot easier, more convenient to carry around paper than, you know, a bag of gold. Well, even as governments issued their own paper currency, they were always backed by gold. And the United States had that system up until 1971. And the British forced it didn't have to be this way, but Nixon closed the gold window to prevent a run on Fort Knox or whatever, instead of raising the price of gold, is what should have happened to devalue the dollar. But anyway, it started this whole floating exchange rate system and fiat money backed by absolutely nothing except the promise of the United States. And it says right on there, "In God we trust." So you're good, right? Well, another development happened about 30 years after that, somewhere around 98, 99. During the Great Depression, Roosevelt had signed several laws into being. He established the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. The government would, in case a bank blew out, the government would back your deposits up to $100,000. That was back when $100,000 was a lot of money. And another law was Glass-Steagall, which prohibited banks from engaging in speculation. You could speculate, that's fine, but if you had depositors' money, no, because you run the risk of losing a bet and wiping out depositors' savings. Well, Bill Clinton repealed Glass-Steagall. And that was the time, too, when computers were really coming of age, and it began this modern age of speculation. It's really, the financial system is really parasitic, and every parasite has to have a host. You have to have an underlying economy for this speculative thing to work, right? Because you can't eat gold, you can't eat paper, and we all need to eat food if we're going to stay alive, right? So somebody has to grow food, supply it, truck it, get it from point A to B, and so on and so forth. And after World War II, the United States was an industrial powerhouse. They had been building cars and trucks in Detroit, Motor City, up until World War II. And then those machine tools were quickly retooled to build tanks and jeeps and airplanes. And because of that industrial capacity, the United States supplied their allies, including the Soviet Union, and they were able to defeat the Nazis and the Japanese. And it was because of that industrial power. And the United States, after the war, was the world's greatest creditor. And it helped Europe to recover from the war. It helped Japan to recover from the war as well. But then the financiers turned upon the industrial powerhouse. And it was at that time that the dollar was taken off the gold standard that there was an attack upon the industrial base of the United States. The Federal Reserve Chairman at the time, Paul Volcker, called it controlled demolition. And a lot of factories were shut down, shipped overseas, and the whole globalist thing really hollowed out the United States. And now it is the world's greatest debtor by far. It's trillions and trillions, and that's just the government debt. There's corporate debt, private debt. At some point, the debt, the interest will not even be able to be paid. And that the United States now is paying $1 trillion a year in interest. And corporate debt, similar, and as interest rates rise to combat inflation, it becomes harder and harder and harder for new debt to be issued and for the old debt to be paid. So there is a point at which the system falls apart. And no doubt that will coincide with Jehovah's Day. Right? That's a satanic evil thing. Well, yes. And Jehovah can use that to make a point. And really the issue is, and this is going to be settled with finality, is Jehovah the true God? He's up to the task of proving that he is. And by bringing this system to its knees, he's going to force the issue. He's going to make people decide. He's going to make people choose if they will submit to his kingdom in the hands of Christ, or whether they'll try to perpetuate Satan's unjust system. And that will determine everyone's destiny, their choice. It's called the hour of judgment, the hour of test, coming upon the entire inhabited earth. Well, we had a little preview of that in the 7th chapter of Ezekiel. And Jehovah had been warning the Jews in Jerusalem for a long time that if they didn't mend their ways, that he was going to punish them. Well, the time had come. And he says to his prophet, tell them that the end has come upon the four corners of the land. The end is now upon you, and I will unleash my anger against you, and I will judge you according to your ways and call you to account for all your detestable deeds. He goes on to say, and you will have to know that I am Jehovah. Well, he goes on again. He's emphasizing this point. He goes, very soon I will pour out my rage upon you, and I will fully unleash my anger against you, and I will judge you according to your ways. Look, the day. Look, it is coming. Your turn has come. The time will come. The day will arrive. So it's Jehovah's hour of judgment, and judgment begins with the house of God. The Jews living in Jerusalem were God's people. You see where this is going? Jerusalem was the place where Jehovah caused his name to reside, and he had his holy temple there, representing his presence. Well, the Jews were ready to defend their city and their heritage. They were very proud, right? So verse 14, they've blown the trumpet, the battle trumpet, and everyone is ready. But no one is going to the battle because my wrath is against the whole multitude. The sword is outside, and the pestilence and the famine are inside. Sword, famine, pestilence. We're talking the three horsemen of the apocalypse. First horse is Christ, isn't it? And Jesus said, nation will rise against nation, sword, food shortages, and pestilence. And Jesus also mentioned Jerusalem in that context, didn't he? In a tribulation coming on the entire inhabited earth. So if you survive that, it says all their hands will hang limp and their knees will drip with water. People are going to wet their pants in fear, knowing that it's Jehovah's judgment. Well, verse 19, they will throw their silver into the streets, and their gold will become an abhorrent thing. Neither their silver nor their gold will be able to save them in the day of Jehovah's fury. And they will not be satisfied, nor will they fill their stomachs, for it has become a stumbling block, causing their error. And then he goes on in verse 21. I will give it into the hand of foreigners for plunder, and to the wicked ones of the earth for spoil, and they will profane it. And I will turn my face away from them, and they will profane my concealed place, and robbers will enter into it and profane it. Well, God's concealed place was that most holy compartment, within the most holy, within the larger temple. Only the high priest could go into the most holy once a year. So Jehovah was turning that over to robbers, and all of the people associated with that temple, their houses would be despoiled by the robbers, and their gold and silver would be useless. They couldn't buy off the killers. Well, most people don't have gold and silver nowadays, do they? And if they do, that's usually paper gold. You know, they buy an exchange-traded fund. And that's just not the way to do it. But so Jehovah was showing here that this system is going to crash. And there's nothing anyone can do about it. War, famine, pestilence, and global financial collapse. It's interesting. We might think that that's dealing with the ancient Jews, but if you go to the 5th chapter of James, and James was speaking to anointed Christians, writing to them, I should say, who would be living prior to the parousia of Christ. In the 5th chapter, in verse 7, he says, "Be patient then, brothers, until the presence, parousia, of the Lord. Look, the farmer keeps waiting for the precious fruit of earth, exercising patience over it until the early rain and the late rain arrive. You too, exercise patience, make your hearts firm, because the presence of the Lord has drawn close." The Watchtower says the presence of the Lord occurred in 1914. It's a done deal. It's all over. But no. The scriptures show that the parousia, the presence, is the end of Christianity. And if you make it to the presence and you're approved, you have the crown of life. But going back to that 5th chapter, preceding what James wrote about the parousia, he's still writing Christians, and he says, "Come now, you rich men, weep and wail over the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your clothing has become moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have rusted away, and their rust will be a witness against you, and will consume your flesh. What you have stored up will be like a fire in the last days. Look, the wages you have withheld from the workers who harvested your fields keep crying out, and the cries for help of the reapers have reached the ears of Jehovah of armies. You have lived in luxury and for self-gratification on the earth, and you have fattened your hearts on the day of slaughter. You have condemned, you have murdered the righteous one. Is he not opposing you?" And then that's when he said, "Be patient, brothers, until the presence of the Lord." So he's talking to anointed Christians, brothers, who have defrauded their brothers, withheld their wage, while they've lived in shameless luxury. Well, who's he talking about? I know some men that live in shameless luxury. They live in this granite castle in Warwick, and they have a virtual army of servants. In fact, they have construction people that built this place for them. Granite, especially quarried from China. It's beautiful. They have chauffeurs drive them around. They fly first class. They have a luxury view of the lake, and on and on and on. They live like kings. And they have defrauded Jehovah's people. I've spoken about this and written about it many times, that the Watchtower has dispossessed over 1,000 congregations, simply taking their kingdom halls that they built themselves and paid for, but don't own. Too bad. You're evicted. Go somewhere else. Go here, go there. We don't care. Jehovah knows. The complaint has reached his ears. Well, it's interesting. It says your gold and silver has rusted away. Well, gold doesn't rust. Silver may tarnish a bit, but you can shine it up. That's one of the beautiful things about gold. It lasts and lasts forever. You know, when the first mention of gold is in the Bible, it's in connection with the Garden of Eden. Apparently, Jehovah built this beautiful garden, and there was gold just laying about. It is a beautiful metal, what can I say? And it's valued. But if we value it more than these spiritual things, and if we exploit people so we can live in luxury, then Jehovah has a problem with that, especially if we claim to be serving the Most High. So their gold rusting away against them simply means that their wealth will be taken, just as it was with the Jews. They had to throw their gold and silver into the street, and they couldn't take it with them to Babylon, could they? They were hauled off in chains, and that was it. So Jehovah has the means to discipline people. As regards the collapse of this global financial system, it's come close a few times. If you remember back 2008, I know some of you are young and you probably weren't of age and weren't paying much attention back then, but one company, AIG, they had these derivatives bets. Derivatives are incomprehensible, and there's 2 quadrillion worth of derivatives. Only computers can keep track of this. It's beyond counting. But AIG had some derivatives bets on mortgage-backed securities and complex transactions, and they blew up, and they couldn't pay their derivatives obligations. And it created a domino cascade because all of the banks are intertwined and they depend on this payment so they can make that payment and on and on. So it required the government to step in a big way, and it was amounted to trillions and trillions of dollars. They had an emergency meeting one weekend in September, I think, 2008, and President George Bush, he was terrified and said, this sucker could come down. But it didn't. I think it nearly blew out again in 2019, September, when they started the overnight repo thing, and it was like $10 billion a night, and it grew. Oh, we're going to stop it in October. Well, it continued to grow. We're going to stop it in November. Hundreds of billions. Prior to that, we were hearing about Deutsche Bank on the ropes, and they're one of the biggies. I mean, they have tens of trillions in derivatives, and if you lose just a small percentage, it wipes out your assets, so-called. And then came 2020 and the pandemic lockdown, and trillions of dollars were flooded into the system again, and you didn't hear about Deutsche Bank anymore. So at some point, though, they're going to let it go intentionally, but it will be on Jehovah's timetable. And nobody knows the day or hour, right? So, I'm going to go read another long passage, but in the 8th chapter of Daniel, it talks about this fierce-looking king that will come on the scene in the last days, the final part of the days. And it says his power will become great, but not through his own power. He will bring ruin in an extraordinary way, and he will be successful and act effectively, and he will bring mighty ones to ruin, and also the people made up of the holy ones. And by his cunning, he will use deception to succeed. So it is in the power of a very small clique of men who controlled central banks. They can collapse the system, bankrupt the millionaires and the other billionaires, collapse the stock markets, the bond markets, all of that, wipe everybody out, and then come back in and buy up what they want and own everything. Perhaps there'll just be a few big banks functioning, one big central bank, like the World Bank, the IMF, and you will not be able to buy or sell unless you get this mark of the beast. Well, Jehovah's Witnesses really have no inkling of how this works, because according to the Watchtower, people have been getting the mark of the beast for since the League of Nations, and then they became defunct, and then the United Nations supposedly became the 8th king, and people have been getting this mark and can't buy or sell. How does that work? Do you know anyone that's been locked out of the system and cannot buy or sell unless they make some compromise of some sort? Well, they have the power to do that now, and they are doing it to a limited extent. People are being deplatformed, and now people are being debanked. There's a politician in the UK, Nigel Farage, who found out one day his bank just shut his account down. He went to 7 other banks to open an account. We don't want your money. You can't bank here. You're locked out of the system. And that was because of his political views. He's a conservative. It happened in Canada, too, when the truckers staged their little protest. The government got pretty heavy-handed, went after their bank accounts, shut them down. So, yeah, that's, excuse me. They can do that. And if they go to a cashless system, which we're nearly there, then they can control every transaction we make. And if the smaller banks are all wiped out, which is where they're going with that, and you have to deal with this one central authority, and you probably have to have a social score or something, you know, like they do in China, Jehovah's Witnesses will be shut out. It says the holy ones will be brought to ruin, right? So if you mention the name Jehovah, you won't be allowed to buy or sell, to eat. And yeah. So that's, Satan wants to starve us and all, force us to renounce our faith. Okay. Jesus said, whoever seeks to save his soul will lose it. Whoever loses his soul for my sake will save it. So how can you lose your soul and save it? The resurrection. If we compromise to keep our soul alive, then we're going to lose it. So Jehovah is willing to help us. He's the Savior, right? But we have to have faith. It's easy now, right? It won't be then. In the book of Habakkuk, I've written about this and done a video or two on it. Ostensibly, it's about the Chaldean, but he dispossesses the world, and he brings to ruin all the nations. That doesn't sound like Babylon. Babylon was a type. The antitype is the 8th king. So Jehovah allows that to happen, but it provokes his intervention. And Habakkuk was given this vision of Jehovah getting into the mix. And it's really talking about the coming of Christ. But I want to read to you the last segment here of Habakkuk's letter. Well, he sees all of this horrible carnage and then this vision of this terrible God coming down. And he said, I heard, and I trembled within. At the sound, my lips quivered. Rottenness entered my bones, and my legs beneath me were shaking. But I quietly wait for the day of distress, for it is coming upon the people who attack us. Although the fig tree may not blossom, and there will be no fruit on the vines, although the olive crop may fail, and the fields may produce no food, although the flock may disappear from the pen, and there may be no cattle in the stalls. Yet as for me, I will exult in Jehovah, and I will be joyful in the God of my salvation. The sovereign Lord Jehovah is my strength. He will make my feet like those of a deer and cause me to tread on the high places. Thanks for watching.